Welcome yet again to part 3 of my consideration of Jonathan Wells' Icons of Evolution.
Another icon of evolution is the four-winged fruit fly. Most fruit flies have two wings, but a series of mutations in a fruit fly can cause it to develop a second set of wings, very normal looking, but in fact there are no muscles attached to it, so the second set of wings is effectively dead. The fly is a hopeless cripple. It's kind of like having a small plane with an extra pair of wings tied to its tail. This is not the forerunner of a new race of insects, but an evolutionary dead end.
Four-winged fruit flies. Something I haven't thought about since high school, and that was a long time ago. The best rebuttal of sorts comes from NCSE. While it's not a direct response to Wells, as far as I know, it really hits some pertinent points that I think Wells is trying to imply. Quote,
"The four-winged fruit fly is a classic example of how creationists misinterpret the genetic analysis of development. Developmental geneticists try to understand the role of a gene by modifying a gene and analyzing consequences. So it is of little consequence that four-winged flies could not survive in the wild," as Wells notes. The importance of the four-winged fruit fly is that it demonstrated that a few mutations in a single gene were able to transform an entire structure. These experiments are not meant to show the exact mechanism by which today's biological structures evolve. Laboratory experiments will not perfectly replicate wild conditions. But by considering simpler circumstances, researchers can gain insights into big questions. Lab work like the work described above, and they cited a different study, allows researchers to refine their understanding and move the research to ever more complex situations, balancing a desire for greater realism, decreased ability to focus on a single factor.
The last two icons I wrote about were fossil horses and the ape-to-human picture. In both cases, there is some real evidence here. The important point in both of these icons, I'll mention them together, is that a very heavy dose of philosophy is laid onto the evidence in each case, mainly to persuade students that evolution is without direction or purpose. In the case of the ape-to-human icon, students are also told that humans, in effect, are nothing more than animals. Neither one of those claims comes from the evidence. Both of those are philosophical claims, but they use the evidence to make themselves appear more scientific than they really are. And so that's my criticism of those two icons.
based on what is stated, I will be honest, I have no fucking clue what Wells is referring to in regards to fossil horses. I'm assuming I will have to get his book and figure it out. I did have to do some digging into some reviews of his books to try and get a gist. According to Nick Matskill, his article, Icon of Obfuscation, sorry I couldn't pronounce that properly, he states, quote,
2 points should be made about the words like random and undirected. Readers should ask themselves, is the weather random and undirected, or no? If yes, according to Wells, you are subscribing to materialistic philosophy in the guise of empirical science, and we should expect Wells to write his next book about the dogmatic materialism of meteorologists and statisticians, etc. If you think Wells may be overreaching a wee bit to the implication of such words, then join the club and consider the possibility that evolution is random and undirected, in the very same way that the weather is considered random and undirected.
End quote. Even after the reading I did, to be honest, I'm still a bit confused. But I think it does, as Matskill notes, boil down to the belief that evolution is random and there is no purpose. What fossil horses have to do with this, I really don't know. I have no clue. A point that I find interesting, though, The next video and video series that I'm contemplating concerns this very point. Matskill also notes Ken Miller's excellent book Finding Darwin's God, A Scientist's Search for Common Ground Between God and Evolution, which was published in 1999, and it discusses the religious issues surrounding the modern evolution debate. I highly recommend the book. It's been probably 10 years since I've read it, but it's well worth the cost, and I'm pretty sure you can find it used. So there you have it, folks. 10 evolutionary icon failures, according to Jonathan Wells. So when I began this endeavor, I really wasn't quite sure where I was heading with it. I didn't realize that the video that was presented to the Hovind group was actually 2 individual clips of Wells combined. With that said, this is the end of the initial clip. And I may tackle the second clip in another series, depending on how much new information is presented. I do know that Wells has published a second book in 2017 called Zombie Science: More Icons of Evolution. I may just save my energy and tackle that instead at a later date. One needs to consider that Wells is not championing a new idea. The basic argument from design came from William Paley in 1801 in his book Natural Theology. That's basically where he proposed what we know as the watchmaker analogy. There's various iterations on that now, but that's where it came from. The basic notion of modern ID has not changed much since 1801. It failed to produce anything useful then, and it continues not to produce now. What I find odd about individuals such as Wells is their attack on Darwin, or Darwinism. While Darwin's work was groundbreaking, it's not like evolutionary theory has not grown beyond what Darwin proposed. There's been 150 plus odd years since he wrote Origins. ID and creationism, both forms to some degree, have both focused in on Darwin, like he is some fucking god, and that modern science hasn't contributed anything. As many science communicators and other individuals that work at history museums and natural history museums have related, evolution is a fact. Someone else could very easily have been Darwin. This focus on Darwin can sometimes give the misleading impression that the theory of evolution literally sprang from his forehead without any precedent in scientific history. The material for Darwin's theory had actually been known for decades. It was Darwin who was able to bring it all together, to show how all this evidence favored the evolution of species from a common ancestor, and to offer a plausible mechanism, natural selection, by which life might evolve. Lamarck and others had promoted evolutionary theory prior, but in order to explain just how life changed, they really depended on speculation. If not for the shove from Alfred Russel Wallace, we may have been calling it Wallaceism instead. Keep that in mind. And one final note before I close. And I purposely left this for last, as one criticism will be I'm trying to tarnish Wells' reputation. Well, sorry to say he's done that himself. Jonathan Wells is not a professor. He was, and is still, a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Center for Science and Culture, which is a pseudoscientific organization dedicated to promoting intelligent design. His alma mater is UC Berkeley, where he received one of his PhDs, but he did not work there as a professor. So the video description is deliberately misleading. And by describing it with Professor Jonathan Wells of UC Berkeley, the listener or viewer is meant to think Wells is or was a professor at UC Berkeley. The fact that he is a AIDS denialist is enough for me to automatically disregard his position on any scientific or medical matters. Stay smart.